Last week we began a series on my beautiful brokenness, and last week the title was The Treasure in the Jar. And today I want us to ask the question, or I'm going to ask the question on your behalf: God, can I trust you? We've been singing a song there earlier on, I trust in you. I trust in you. And we hadn't sang that song in a very long time. And it's sometimes hard for anybody. Maybe a lot of you won't know this, but there's a bit of a backstory to that song. I don't know if Faith actually knows what it is. But there's a bit of a backstory to the guy who wrote it and what went on with him. But the words in the song are so powerful that I believe you're my healer. But we make that statement in the song, I trust in you. And in Proverbs chapter 3, we're given these instructions by the writer to trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. He will direct your paths. But we're told to trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. And we sing those words, I trust in you. But I want to ask the question today, God, can I really trust you? Can I really trust you? Do I really trust you? There's a story that I'm pretty sure we have shared here before. Around about the mid-1800s, there was a tightrope walker by the name of Charles Blondin. Charles Blondin, he was amazing at what he did. And one of the most amazing things that he probably did that is very well documented is he stretched the tightrope across the Niagara Falls. And he would walk on this tightrope from one side to the other along the tightrope. And crowds would gather and they would cheer as he walked across this tightrope. And there were times whenever he would go across to the middle of the tightrope and he would actually sit down and he would unpack a picnic and he would have a sandwich, and he would eat a sandwich in the middle of the tightrope and hanging above the Niagara Falls, and all the crowds would gather at this amazing feat that they were watching before their eyes. He would bring out a wheelbarrow or whatever, and he would wheel the wheelbarrow across the tightrope, and everyone was gathering and they were cheering Charles Blondin and what he was doing on this tightrope. And then he began to ask the question, do you believe that I could put someone in this wheelbarrow and I could push them across the tightrope? And all the crowds were screaming, yes, we believe that you can do this. We believe that you're able to do that. They had seen him walk across so many times, do so many things on that tightrope, and walk across with a wheelbarrow. So whenever he's asking the question, do you believe that I can put someone in this wheelbarrow and I can bring them across this tightrope? Everyone was cheering, yes. And then his next question was, can I get a volunteer? And the crowd went silent and backed off. Apart from one person who stepped up, who put his faith into action. You see, it's one thing to say, I trust. It's one thing to say, I believe. It's one thing to say, I have faith. But what James tells us, James says in his book, in his letter, show me your faith without your works. I will show you my faith by my works. Faith without works is dead. Faith, trust, belief requires an action. It's not enough just to say, I believe. But that must then come with an action. Faith in action. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. In Mark chapter 9, there's a father and a son. The son is extremely sick and demon-possessed and all this stuff going on with him, and the father comes to Jesus for Jesus to heal the son. And the question, because Jesus is actually questioning the faith of those that are gathered around. And so he turns to the father and he asks the father, do you believe that I can heal him? And the response of the father is somewhat strange because he says, yes, I believe. And then immediately he follows that with, I believe, but help my unbelief. I believe, but help my unbelief. I believe that you can do it, but there's still this part of me that struggles. Will you help me increase my faith? I believe, but I believe, I have faith, I trust, but. And it's very easy for us to sing the songs, and I trust in you. I trust in you. I believe, I have faith, until something happens. And then our faith and our trust and our belief is tested. And then we can be really honest and say, yeah, I believe, but help my unbelief. Trust is only really seen and demonstrated when it's put to the test. It's easy to trust whenever things are going good, but what about whenever things go wrong? The reason why I've been speaking these messages, I shared last week how I began to process these thoughts in my head away last year about bringing this message around brokenness. And this goes back to way kind of last October, November time. And it came out of a book that I was reading by a guy called Glenn C. Damon, who wrote a book called When Shepherds Weep. And I'll be sharing some of what he has written in his book. And one of the things that he writes in this book that I was reading last year, he said, suffering, and I think it's going to be on here, suffering is not merely an emotional crisis. It is a theological crisis. To understand and properly respond to tribulations, we must not just look at how we view the events emotionally, but how we understand them theologically. Theology is basically just the study of God, and ology is the study of. Theos means God, so theology is the study of God. It's what you believe about God. And what happens is whenever something goes wrong within life, there is an emotional response. We have all been there. We have all responded emotionally. And emotions take over. And we make decisions based on emotion. And what he is telling us is, let's begin to look at our theology. Where is God in the midst of all of this? What is God doing? What is God up to? And what do we believe about God in the midst of our trials and tragedies and the circumstances that would come against us in the circumstances of life? How do we view what we go through in light of the Bible, in our understanding of God and of a loving God that we read about in this book? How do we view what we go through, or do we just continue to be emotional around what we go through? Asking the question, why, does not equate to a lack of faith. I believe that we are given permission to ask why. Last week we talked about, and many of the Old Testament prophets would have asked why. Why do the nations rage in vain? Why do the evil prosper? Why is this going on? David asked, we talked about last week, and David asking the question, how long, Lord? Have you forgot about me, Lord? How long has this got to go on for? How long have you got to stay distant from me? We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, because that is, for me, the most difficult question of all. But in the midst of all of their questioning of why and how long, the response was always the same. The response was worship. David's response, in how long, Lord? Yet I will still trust you. I will still trust you. And they worship. In Isaiah chapter 26, we're told this, it says, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord himself is the rock eternal. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. We're living in days where mental health is talked about an awful lot, where the deterioration of mental health is there for everyone to see. We talk about the NHS and how that hospitals and doctors and the NHS, they can't deal with. The system is completely broken because people's minds are a mess. And I think that, if you were to do some research, and this has probably been done, I'm sure, I've read it somewhere, where if you look at different kind of groups of people, communities of people, then you will see an escalation of bad mental health. But within church and with people who have a faith in God, mental health isn't a major concern. Why? Because our minds are steadfast, because we trust in God. Whenever you look around churches, people have a faith, a belief in God, their rock, in Jesus, their salvation. And so I believe that there is, whenever we look at this verse, we got to leave this and go. But you will keep in perfect peace of mind, those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord himself is the rock eternal. And so I want us to look at the life of Job. Job is probably the oldest book in the Bible. We're going to look at God's role within this and how we view God, and look at the life of Job. We could spend a year just going through this book and the life of Job. But what we read in chapter 1 of Job, where it says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God with reverence and abstained and turned away from evil because he honored God. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters. He also possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camel, 500 yoke pairs of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very great number of servants, so that this man was the greatest and wealthiest and most respected of all men in the east, in northern Arabia. This is the introduction to Job, to who Job was. Job was filthy, stinking rich. Probably the wealthiest man that you could ever know in those days. Filthy, stinking rich, had a family. Everybody looked up to Job. If you had a problem, then people would maybe say, hey, go to Job. Job will sort that out. I need help with something. I need to talk to, go to Job. Job's the man. If you need help, go to Job. People would gather, men would gather and seek counsel from Job, because Job seemed to have everything together. Not only did he have everything together, he was blessed in what he had by possessions and by family. We're told that he feared and honored God with his life. There was nothing wrong with Job. No, Job had never done anything wrong. Job had never lived a life of sin. Every choice that Job made was to honor God. So you would think, in light of that all of Job's life, all of his days would be perfect. Then something happens to Job. Because what we're told as we read down to verse 13, says, neither was a day. Verse 13 of chapter 1. This perfect man that everyone looked up to, that everyone probably, men would have aspired to be Job, to have his wealth, to have his knowledge, his wisdom, his counsel. Neither was a day when everything changed. When everything changed. There will be a day, there will be a moment that, should you live to be 100, that particular moment and that particular day, you will never forget. As long as you live, that's the moment when everything changed. This is the moment that happened for Job. Now there was a day when it all fell apart, when it all come crashing down. Job gets a report from one of his servants. All these animals, the Sabaeans have come in and they have taken all of the animals. He gets another report about other animals. his possessions that have gone. There's a lightning strike from heaven that burns up and consumes all the other animals. So in an instant, all of his possessions are wiped out. The servants are dead. Job begins obviously to think about the possessions, about the camels, about the oxen, about everything that he owns. And in the midst of thinking about his possessions, he gets another report. On this day, your sons and your daughters, they were meeting in the eldest brother's house, and a wind came and the house fell in on itself. All of your sons and your daughters are dead. And that one day, Job lost everything. Some of you know what that's like, for your world to come crashing down in just one day and in just one moment. Verse 20, we're told then, Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head in mourning for the children, and he fell down to the ground and he worshiped God. Job's response in this loss was to fall down and to worship God. You think that was bad enough in the midst of his loss? 7 sons, 3 daughters, and he's lost them all. He is in mourning. And in chapter 2, Job breaks out in sores. So bad that Job actually grabs a bit of pottery, we're told, and he begins to scrape the skin on his body because of the boils and the sores that he is covered in from head to toe. He is scraping his skin with broken pieces of pottery to try and get some sense of, gotta get rid of these. That was his only answer, just to scrape his body with broken pieces of pottery. He sits there. Job's got 3 friends. They hear the news of what's happened with Job, so they come to comfort Job. And what we're told is that as they approach Job and they see him from a distance, they're actually taken aback by, they can't even recognize him. Because of the disfigurement, because of the boils and the sores and the scraping away of the skin. And he's sitting there. This man who at one point everybody admired, everybody looked up to, is now sitting covered in boils and sores and scraping them off with pottery, and they can't even recognize him. What we're told they do is that they sit down with him for 7 days and for 7 nights, and they don't say a word. It was the best thing they ever did. They sat down beside him. They didn't say a thing. They were silent. There are moments where I have gone into homes and mothers that have lost children. And all I can say is, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Because the problem is, we look for an answer. We want that answer of why. Why has this happened? And sadly, there are Christians that want to put their tuppence worth in and want to give an answer, and their theology can be so messed up. Well, I've got a word from the Lord. This is why this has happened. The best thing that these 3 men did was just to sit down and keep their mouths shut and just be there. Just be a presence in the midst of the turmoil and the tragedy. The problem that all these men had was they had a messed up theology. Their hearts were in the right place because they wanted to be with Job. They wanted to be with their friend. They wanted to bring comfort. But they had this theology, this messed up theology. Though their hearts was in the right place, their theology was a mess. Because they had this understanding and belief that if something bad happens to you, it's because you've sinned. And they spend the whole of the entire book having these conversations between Job and his 3 friends on why this has happened. Job, this is why it's happened. What have you done, Job? Just tell us what you've done. We'll make a sacrifice. We'll repent and we'll move on. And Job's like, I haven't done anything wrong. This was the theology that they all had. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't sinned. I don't know why this is happening. Some people have that belief today in church. This is why. And they go through these conversations. And Job is even, in chapter 31, he's asserting his integrity. He's going through all the things. He's saying, this is me. This is how good I am. I haven't sinned. He's questioning God on everything that he's going through. He's questioning his friends, responding to his friends. And then eventually this young kid rocks up called Elihu. And Elihu puts him straight on a few things. Elihu says, I didn't want to talk, because you men are older than me. But you've messed up. Your theology is messed up. Your belief system is all wrong. And he begins to switch the focus to God and begins to explain to Job about God. And then God answers himself. And God begins to talk to Job himself and begins to explain a few things to God himself. But here's the kind of the kicker for me. Because there are times whenever we have gone through stuff, and there will be moments whenever we'll be asking God, where are you? And I don't know, maybe I just speak for me, maybe you're different. But there have been so many moments whenever I really needed God the most that it felt like that's when he was most distant. Those moments whenever you're calling out and crying out to God in the midst of brokenness, in the midst of just, God, I really, really need you to move. And there's nothing. And you come to church and you'd be coming up the prayer lines and you'd be crying out, God, come, touch me. I'm here. And there's other people testifying about being touched and they weren't even looking for, well, I was just here, I was standing at the back and the Holy Spirit just came and moved on me. I wasn't even looking for it. And I'm like, God, I'm looking for you to move and you're not moving in me. And this agent isn't even expecting anything and you're moving in him and her. Not fair, God. I would have many arguments with God. Where are you? How long? Why? This book of Job is more than a book about personal suffering. It's a book that confronts our assumptions about God and how he responds to the trials we face or experience. Second, and even worse, it leaves us with a feeling of isolation from God. In the midst of our pain, he seems indifferent and distant, where prayer seems empty and ineffective. Like Job, we can understand why we experience suffering. But what we cannot understand is why God remains hidden and indifferent to our need and to the wickedness that assaults us. We wrestle with the questions that suffering brings and why there seems to be no answer coming forth. It's one thing when Satan does not play by the rules, but it's quite another when it seems as if God does not either. Sometimes I've found myself in that position where I'm quite, God, why are you distant from me? Why, whenever I need you the most, that's whenever you're distant? I'm almost done. There's another slide there that probably starts, we must not trust. We must not trust God because we have all the answers. Rather, we must trust him in spite of the fact that we cannot attain the answers. We must trust him in the dark. Job did not receive the answers to his questions, nor did he receive any reason for his suffering. Even though the narrator gives us the answer to the mystery before the story unfolds, God never shared that information with Job. To trust God is not to understand all that God is and does. It is to come to the point where we trust him without any such understanding. What Job saw and heard and what he came to understand was not an explanation for his tragedies, but an unveiling of the reality of God in the midst of his personal pains. This is so crucial. What I've just read is so crucial. Because what happens, and worship team, you can come. What happens at the start of the story is there's this conversation that goes on between Satan and God. And God actually says to Satan, have you thought about Job? And Satan's response is, well, you put a hedge around him. I can't touch him. I can't do anything to him. And God, in many ways, gives Satan permission to bring this tragedy to the door. Now, again, please don't develop a theology that everything you go through is a result of a conversation that Satan had with God. And God said, yeah, Satan, go and do that. Give you permission to do that. Sometimes life is life. We're living in a fallen world that is an absolute mess and chaotic. Job has no understanding. If you read through the book, then you're able to see why this unfolds. You're able to see a background story as to what's going on. And in the midst of Job trying to figure out with his theology of things will only go wrong if you do wrong, and I haven't done anything wrong, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. In the midst of him defending himself and his own character and his own integrity, he doesn't know why. Why is this happening to me? And as you get towards the end of the story, at no point does God tell Job why. At no point does God sit down with Job and say, Job, listen, let me fill you in here. Let me talk you through a few things just so you understand and you know what's going on. God never has that conversation with Job. As much as we would want to know why. Why? God doesn't always give us that answer. Conversation that God has with Job off the back of the comments of Elihu. Conversation goes something like this. I'm God. You're not. I don't say that in a derogatory kind of way, but that's the reality. Because God begins to explain to Job and ask Job the question, Job, where were you at creation? Where were you when I stretched out the skies and placed the stars in the sky? Where were you when I caused the earth to spin and laid its foundations? Where were you, Job? And I gathered the oceans together. And God begins to explain to Job who he is. God begins to explain to Job how great he is. Out of the experience that Job had, out of the tragedy, the loss, the trauma, the grief, out of what Job went through, Job ends up with a greater understanding of God, with a greater understanding of who God is, and with a deeper understanding and a deeper relationship with God. As a result of his brokenness, can I trust you, God? Yes, I'm God. I stretched out the universe. I cause it to continue. I gathered the oceans and the seas together. I am the Lord God Almighty. I know what I'm doing. You can trust me. I've got you in the palm of my hand. It might not feel like it, but I've got you. You can trust me. In the midst of what you go through, in the midst of your brokenness, in your response to God, may it take you to a deeper understanding awareness of Him, of who He is in your life. In your life. Let it bring you closer to Him. At the end of Job's story, Job ends up with twice as much. We're told in chapter 1 of everything that he had. And at the end of the story, God blesses him with double of everything. Everything that he had, God gave him back and he doubled it. But greater than the possessions was his understanding and deeper awareness, knowledge, and relationship with God. God also blessed him again with 7 sons and 3 daughters, just like he had at the start. He gave him everything back plus more. There's something prophetic in that. What we're told is that Job is sitting at the end of the story and friends begin to gather and they begin to bring him gifts. And they comfort him because of the tragedy that he had been through. You see, in spite of what we may get in this life, and in spite of what we have gone through, it's something that will always be there. That will never leave. That pain, that wound will leave a scar that whenever it's pressed will cause pain. Because some of you have experienced loss on that day, that no matter how long you live, it's still sore. But I hope and I pray that in the midst of that, that it will bring you closer to God. That it will bring you to the feet of Jesus, who knows. He knows. He knows. And in the midst of that, He wants to take you in His arms and say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Job was given double, plus his sons, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And people gathered because of what he had been through. Because they recognized that no amount of possessions would replace what he went through. But again, I think that there's something prophetic in that. And with this, I finish. I've shared this before with Caroline. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Paul writes these words. He says, therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. See, there will come a point in time when time will cease to exist for us, when we will step out of this scene of time and we will step into eternity, and we will see what is unseen. We will come face to face with what is unseen, and God will give us. God will bless us. God will bring us face to face with Jesus in eternity. There will be a reuniting. There will be a reuniting. There will be coming face to face with your daughter, with your husband, with those that you have lost. And I love Revelation. because we live in a world that is completely chaotic and a mess. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But Revelation takes us through this journey towards absolute peace, where God reigns, where Jesus reigns, and we reign with him. One of my favorite verses in the Bible: he will wipe away every tear from your eyes. Every tear that you have ever cried, he will wipe it away. And I get this image of Jesus just kneeling down in front of us, putting his thumbs in our eyes and wiping away the tears. Wiping away the tears. And saying to us, welcome home. Welcome home. Will you stand to your feet with me, please? God is in control, church. Can you trust him? Yes, you can. He is God. You can trust him with every circumstance, with every situation, with every son, with every daughter, with every parent, every family member. You can trust him. You can trust him. He knows what he's doing.